Looking for Alaska. Let's talk about that. As of right now, Looking for Alaska by John Green is in fact one of the most controversial books in the United States. Even though it was written all the way back in 2005, it just started to receive criticism within the past few years. 7 US states have looked at banning this book as a whole, and so many more school districts throughout the nation have looked at banning the book as well. Now, is this book just so explicit that one cannot even begin to understand the meaning? No! Yet, that brings up the question, should it even be allowed? Or more accurately, does it even deserve to be read next to all these other so-called classics? Many would say no, it does not, merely as a gut reaction to the characters' actions alone, this including their habits, wants, and needs, but there's so much more to the book than just sex, drugs, and alcohol. So to answer that question for myself, I say yes, it should be allowed. Not only should it be allowed, but it deserves its very own place on that shelf, and I'm going to tell you why, but in 2 parts. So, part 1, why is it even being banned? For starters, I hear so many people saying that Looking for Alaska is only about sex, drugs, and alcohol. While, get this, it does include those things. That's not what the point of the book is. John Green could have easily taken this content out, as well as the language, and censored the book as a whole. However, I believe that if he'd done that, it would have taken away from the overall point of the book. Most good books and all great books have something in it to add to its character, and the fact that the students of Culver Creek were involved in such scandalous activities merely made the book all the more intense. Books are made up of so many different components, and taking away just one of them from Looking for Alaska could have potentially made the book a non-tear-jerking, non-questionable, monotonous vanilla cake. And the number 2 reason as to why people say Looking for Alaska shouldn't be allowed in schools is the fact that Looking for Alaska is just far too complex for such feeble-minded teenagers such as ourselves. Now, I'm just so sorry, but did you forget that we read literature such as The Island of Dr. Moreau? A book all about a crazed lunatic, animal testing, half-human creating drunken psychopath. That apparently wasn't too complex, and I know it's crazy coming from such a feeble mind, but I still don't agree with animal abuse. Or what about Romeo and Juliet? A playwright about 2 star-crossed lovers, and trying to get that much information was about the equivalent of deciphering a lost language. So, Stooks, to anyone saying that John Green's Looking for Alaska is just too complex for any teenager to understand, just do me a favor, won't ya, and let them know that we are coming of age and extremely capable of digesting, comprehending, and occasionally applying these life lessons to our livelihood. Some of which were lessons that were taught throughout Looking for Alaska, and the absence of these complex topics that we are already aware of could have taken away from the lessons meant to be taught. And that, my friend, takes us into part 2. Why Looking for Alaska deserves to be in the classroom. For starters, the book in its entirety is just so much more relatable. Sure, we may not all be doing drugs, but it connects to us with kids our age going through the same mental, social, and educational problems. Now, I don't know if it's just a me thing, but I seem to connect more to a group of teens than that of an 8-foot murdering monster, a bunch of farm animals, kids training for an intergalactic space battle, or that of a boy searching for a treasure that never really existed. Looking for Alaska is not only more relatable, but it brings an entire new genre of literature to the classroom, as it is considered a contemporary novel. It's written in a completely different fashion, and if the goal of the teacher is to engage its students, then give them a book that is actually worthwhile, such as Looking for Alaska. People argue that because it's not a classic, it automatically shouldn't be allowed. But is it really not a classic? Going off the definition that a classic is a book that hasn't finished what it has to say, then Looking for Alaska is a classic, for it has so much more to say, and so much that was said with the intention of leaving the reader to think. The book is about the journey of finding oneself. The truth is not in the alcohol or the drugs for that matter, but rather it's in the great perhaps. It's the reason Looking for Alaska was written. In this book, everyone was on a self-provoked journey to find themselves, and the creek was only part of that self-discovery. All of these disreputable actions throughout the book are not meant to encourage the teenage mind. They're not meant to provoke bad behavior, and they're not meant to outrage any individual. All of the actions in Looking for Alaska that many would not agree with were merely part of something much greater. They are part of the journey of discovery, and in Pudge's case, all of these mishaps just so happen to be one small piece of a much larger puzzle. Isaac Newton's last words were, "The great ocean of truth lie undiscovered before me." That is the purpose of Looking for Alaska. It's the undiscovered that leaves us intrigued and eager to venture further on in life. So yes, Dukes, Looking for Alaska should be, no, it needs to be in the English classroom. For the lessons it teaches are so much more valuable than any 20-pack of Marlboro Lights, bottle of Strawberry Hill wine, or carton of good old Ambrosia.